Happy birthday to you, you're 192. I bought you some nappies and I hope they fit you. Sorry about that. Hi everyone and welcome to this Video Song Frontier video. My name is Jay Whitefield and I've not done a video for quite some time where I've basically just sat in front of the webcam and had a bit of a natter. But today is going to be one of those videos. If I was UXW, well actually no, this wouldn't even be such and such a person tells a story. But even though I can't do that because that's not that's someone else's property is such and such tells a story. So I'm not going to take that from the Stereo Dust Particles family. Anyway. The reason I was singing that comical version of the Happy Birthday song was basically because yesterday marked a birthday of basically one of the marks that I respect the most. And this was the Intel Pentium. Happy 20th birthday, Pentium processor. On March the 22nd, 1993, the Pentium processor was born. And it, well, without meaning to put too fine a point on it, it basically made computing more awesome than it already had been. This obviously isn't an original Pentium processor. This Pentium processor came out of a Dell Latitude D510. And it's a Pentium M 1.6 GHz. So I thought I would spend some time just kind of talking to you about the Pentium, talking to you about, you know, my personal reflections, and just kind of do a wee bit of the history. Unfortunately, there's not going to really be any videos, you know, pictures or music. But the Pentium processor, for the longest time, was Intel's, you know, flagship processor, central processing unit for computers. And it replaced the Intel 486, which, you know, I am one of the biggest fans of the 486 processor. You know, I love it. For older games, it's absolutely fantastic. But when the Pentium first came out, it really did run rings around the old 486 CPUs. You know, and when it came out, it was just the X2s. But obviously, as time went on, you know, the Intel 486 was still being released alongside the Pentiums. So they, you know, the Pentiums would still run faster. I mean, even if you had a 100 MHz DX4, Pentium 75 could actually still outrun it. So, it all started when, well, basically, the reason the Intel Pentium is actually called as such is because at the time, clone processor manufacturers were actually naming their processors similar to Intel's. So AMD used to make their own line of 486s called the AM486. You know, and before that, you actually had the AM386 as well. Now, in the United States, Microsoft tried to file a trademark on the 486, the x86 names, because they were hoping originally to call the new processor the i586. But unfortunately, a sequence of numbers was not actually seen as being distinctive enough to, you know, be trademarked. So the name Pentium was chosen, and the people that we can thank for that Pentium name are Lexicon Branding. And basically what they did is they actually put started with EUM, which would basically made it sound like, a core component of any computer. Almost like a chemical component, like, a sodium, rubidium, calcium, cesium, what on earth is that? Cesium, and, things like that. Although, trust me, you probably don't want to put cesium at the heart of your computer. I mean, that stuff is dangerous. It's highly reactive. That chemical literally does have anger issues. Seriously, it needs to go to anger management class. Come on, it's like, Ken, Ken, you've only got like the one. Again, you've only got like the one electron circling you, but that's no reason to get into, a meltdown state. It's just not even funny. Moving on. So, of course, because it was going to be the fifth iteration, it would they actually came up with Pent and put Pent in front of Ium to make Pentium. So that's where the name Pentium comes from. It's the fifth generation of the x86 processor. Now, it's quite funny actually, because it was originally a sixth generation processor, but because it was just so successful, the brand actually continued, and it still does today. You can still buy a Pentium dual core. You can still buy Pentium chips that are brand new. You can buy 486 chips, but they've largely, remained the same, obviously. They are actually still used in some embedded applications, but I mean, it'd be like Intel using 486 to, talk about any processor after that. That would be crazy. In 2006, the Pentium brand briefly disappeared from Intel's roadmaps, but it did actually come back in 2007. And then, of course, in 1998, the Celeron was introduced as a low-cost alternative to the Intel Pentium. And as if by magic, here's a Celeron. Celeron 900 MHz. Out of the Dell Latitude C500. You may remember my video where I actually upgraded that to a Pentium 3 800. With the 2006 introduction of the Intel Core brand as the company's flagship line of processors, the Pentium series was going to be discontinued. However, due to a demand for mid-range dual-core processors, the Pentium brand was repurposed to be Intel's mid-range processor series, in between the Celeron and the Core series, continuing with the Pentium dual-core line. And in 2009, the dual-core suffix was dropped, and the new x86 microprocessors started carrying the plain Pentium name again. Quite funny, isn't that? I know of something else that's decided not to be called such and such 5 or a version number. A few things have started doing that. The new Fast and Furious. Well, when I say the new Fast and Furious 4 was just called Fast and Furious. And of course, everybody's favourite game, the new SimCity. SimCity 5 is actually just called SimCity. So anyway, back into the past. The original Pentium and Pentium MMX, multimedia extensions by the way, processors were the superscalar follow-up on the 486 processors, and they were marketed from 1993 to 1999. And basically, in the in the 90s, the computer industry, evolution of computers just ran impossibly quick. I mean, if you think it's bad today, you should have seen it back then. I mean, literally, you'd buy a computer and within a few months it would be impossibly obsolete. So basically, Pentium released the overdrive chip that could actually fit into older motherboards. You know, so basically you could have a 486 box and that could bring it up to kind of some sort of Pentium performance levels. Really quite thoughtful of Intel at the time. You probably wouldn't catch that today. In fact, you know, if you've got an Apple Mac, I'm pretty sure the chip will be soldered onto the board if Apple had their way. In 1997, Intel Pentium MMX was introduced. And that was basically a version of the Pentium processor that was just designed to handle multimedia a wee bit better. It was developed by Intel's Research and Development Center in Israel and sold as Pentium with MMX technology, or usually just called the Pentium MMX. And as some of you know, I have shown a few MMX-enabled computers on this channel. Although it was based on the original P5 architecture, it did feature a new set of MMX instructions intended to improve the performance of multimedia tasks, such as encoding and decoding digital media data. And, you know, and to be honest, I have heard people actually say that, you know, they could game a bit better with an MMX in their system. That, of course, was introduced on the 22nd of October 1996. And these new instructions, they worked on new data types, such as 64 packed put my false teeth in straight. 64-bit packed vegetables. Go home, Jay, you're drunk. Do you know what I need? I need a cup of tea. The new instructions worked on 64-bit packed vectors of either 8-bit integers, 4 16-bit integers, 2 32-bit integers, or 1 64-bit integer. Whatever all that means. If you want to know what this means, go and do computer science. It'll cost you blooming £27,000 to do that. But the Pentium MMX was a pretty good CPU. However, Intel was also running another line actually of processors alongside the original Pentiums. This was introduced in 1996 and it was a P6 architecture, and it was called the Pentium Pro. They started, and it was in 1995 actually. Derp. They started marketing it as the Pentium Pro for the high-end market in 1995. I mean, these CPUs, they are quite, you know, they're quite a nice thing to have now. And to be honest, they're only going to become more rare because people are actually turning them in to melt all the gold down off of them, because these CPUs actually had gold on their die. And it seems that gold is actually back in now at the moment. And I'm gonna be careful what I say now, because the next thing I say could make people demand for Pentium Pros go up, and then people will be wanting them, and then the prices will skyrocket. I've never used a Pentium Pro system that I'm aware of. It introduced out-of-order execution and integrated second-level cache on dual-chip processor package. Now, cache is, for those of you who don't know, is memory that's actually on the CPU itself. You know, it's basically, while 32-bit refers to register memory, that is what the processor is working on there and then. You know, that's the immediate instructions that it's actually working on in the 32 or 64-bit registers. The cache is basically, you know, for the rest of the thing that the rest of the data that the processor is immediately working on. And you should never underestimate the power of cache, because I mean, people just seem to think, oh, raw clock speed is what you need, when actually cache can account for as much as well. You know, so it's like, if you've got two processors, even from Intel, same clock speed, same number of cores, and one is significantly cheaper than the other, it'll probably be due to the cache. And no matter how much you try to convince yourself otherwise, that will, not having that cache there will actually affect the performance of the CPU. But the Pentium Pro did actually introduce some second level cache. The second, but the second P6 generation replaced the original P5 with the Pentium 2, and it rebranded the high-end version as the Pentium 2 Xeon. This was followed by a third version called the Pentium 3. Of course, we all know about the Pentium 3. The Pentium 3 is one of my all-time favourite chips. Now, let me tell you about the Pentium 3. That obviously came out in 1998, I do believe. The Pentium 3 was... Pentium 2 didn't seem to last 2 minutes, although a lot of computers obviously had Pentium 2 CPUs in, but Pentium 3 kind of came out really, really quickly. And these CPUs were really efficient, and I guess now the Pentium 3 has quite a cult following. And there's a good reason for that. They really are very good for whatever you want to do with them. Some of the most versatile chips, and the clock speeds of these chips meant that, they can, theoretically run anything from, Windows 95 or earlier, if, you so want, up until, Windows XP. Or it would have done when Microsoft actually, before Service Pack 2 came out and bloated XP up, beyond all recognisable proportions. The Pentium 3 and Pentium 3 Xeon was the third line of the P6 processors, respectively. The Pentium 2 line added the MMX instructions that were also present in the MMX Pentium. So all Pentium 2 and 3 processors have MMX. Versions of these processors for the laptop market were initially called Mobile Pentium 2 or Mobile Pentium 3. Later versions were called the Pentium 3M, starting with the Pentium 3. The Celeron brand was used for low-end versions of most Pentium processors, with a reduced feature set such as a smaller cache or missing power management features. And the Pentium 3M. We're going to come to that in a minute, because in 2000, Intel released the Pentium 4. Do you remember it? Yeah, so does everyone else. And it came with a new architecture called NetBurst, with a much longer pipeline enabling higher clock frequencies than P6-based processors. Initially, these were called the Pentium 4, and the high-end versions have been called just the Xeon. As with the Pentium 3, there are both mobile Pentium 4 and Pentium 4M processors for the laptop market, with the Pentium 4M denoting more power-efficient versions. Enthusiast versions of the Pentium 4 with the highest clock frequency were called Pentium 4 Extreme Edition. And then, of course, we had the Pentium D, which was the first multi-core Pentium, integrating 2 Pentium 4 chips into one package, and also available as the Enthusiast Pentium Extreme Edition. And the Pentium D. Now, in 2003, Intel released a new processor based on the P6 microarchitecture called the Pentium M, which was much more power efficient than the mobile Pentium 4 and the Pentium 4M and the Pentium 3M. Dual-core versions of the Pentium M were designed under the code Iona, sold under the marketing name Core Duo and Pentium Dual Core. Unlike the Pentium D, it integrated both cores on a single chip. From this point, the Intel Core brand name was used for mainstream Intel processors, and the Pentium brand became a low-end version between the Celeron and the Core. All Pentium M-based designs, including Iona, are for the mobile market. However, the Pentium 3M basically kind of formed the basis of the processors that we now use for our computers if you're using Intel. NetBurst, it really wasn't that good. I mean, yeah, sure, you had the high clock frequency, but at what price? The processors really weren't that efficient. and they would dispel heat like a really good central heating system. It was really not... Well, it wasn't Intel's finest hour. And that, I think, caused AMD to kind of take over and win the market over for a short time. But AMD processors weren't the most reliable either. Pentium 4s are reliable. I'll give them that. I mean, Pentium 4s, if it's not for the crappy 2000 noughties electronics with the silly blowing up capacitors and the dodgy electrolyte, I'm pretty sure Pentium 4 machines could test up to the stand of time. But NetBurst really does make the systems. You're using a Pentium 2.4 GHz, but you have to kind of convince yourself that that's what you're using, because it certainly didn't feel like it. I had a Pentium 4 laptop back in the day. It was a 2.4 GHz. It was the machine with the fastest clock speed that I owned, but to be honest, I couldn't see it. Now, on with the cores. The Pentium dual core name continued to be used when the Yona design was extended with 64-bit support, now called the Core microarchitecture. This microarchitecture eventually replaced all NetBurst processors. Yay! Time for a party. Across all the 4 brands: Celeron, Pentium, Core and Xeon. Pentium dual core processors based on the Core microarchitecture use the Allendale and Wolfdale 3M designs for desktop processors and the Merom 2M for mobile processors. In 2009, Intel changed the naming system for Pentium processors, renaming the Wolfdale 3M based processors just to Pentium without the dual core name, and introduced new single and dual core processors based on the Penryn under the Pentium name. The Penryn core is a successor to the Merom core, and Intel's 45nm version of their mobile series of Pentium microprocessors. Frontside bus is increased from 667 MHz to 800 MHz, and the voltage is lowered. Intel released the first Penryn core, the Pentium T4200, in December 2008. In June 2009, Intel released the first single-core processor to use the Pentium name, a consumer ultra-low voltage Penryn core called the Pentium SU2700. In September 2009, Intel introduced the Pentium SU4000 series, together with the Celeron SU2000 and Core 2 Duo SU7000 series, which are dual-core consumer ultra-low voltage processors based on Penryn 3M and using the 800 MHz frontside bus. The Pentium SU4000 series has 2 MB of L2 cache, but is otherwise basically identical to the other 2 lines. The Nehalem microarchitecture was introduced in late 2008 as a successor to the Core microarchitecture, and early in 2010, the new Pentium G6950 processor based on the Clarkdale design was introduced as the Westmere refresh of the Nehalem, which followed the mobile P6X based on Arundel a few months later. It's all these names. No need for it. So, what's happened now then? Pentium still exists today, and some of you will actually remember back in February I actually did a review of the IBM ThinkCentre computer, and this machine actually runs on a Pentium dual core 3 GHz, and I've got to tell you, that thing really shifts along. So Pentiums aren't the slow alternative to the core that they used to be. They're actually quite fast alternatives. Obviously, if you want all the features, you would go and buy a Core processor. But you know what? None of this would be around today if we didn't have the Pentium processor all those years ago. Do you know, I mean, the Pentium processor is still, it means a lot if you're a vintage computer collector or a vintage gamer. because these processors are really very good for old gaming, and they have brought so many awesome programs to us, and they have powered so many exceedingly brilliant computers that it's absolutely brilliant. Back in the early 2000s, I didn't like Intel processors. Bit of a shame. Probably because of not burst, as I like to call it. But you know, every company is going to have a blip. I mean, nobody can always have a perfect lineup of products all of the time. But the fact was, Intel got their ideas together in 2006. They really overhauled everything. Talking of which, what was Vive all about? I never really quite got Vive. It was kind of, you know, suddenly it was there, and then the next minute I looked, it wasn't. But, you know, the Pentium, Intel's processors now, they're as good as they ever have been. Really quite efficient, quite good on power. Of course they get hot, but I mean, they're really fast processors. If you've got the right cooling, they don't get overly hot. You know, it's not like the Pentium 4 Prescott that used to have an actual reputation for it. But these processors, I've just got to say, thank you for 20 years of brilliant, brilliant, brilliant service. And I hope you had a good birthday yesterday. And I know this was probably not one of my best videos, but I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw, please do feel free to peruse my channel. And subscribe if you've not already done so. While you're at it, I hope you'll all join me for my next video. Thank you for watching this one.